The remnants of winter still brushed the air in King's Landing, but the season had unmistakably softened, permitting the buds of early spring to push through frost-crusted soil. Within the Red Keep, Daenerys Targaryen had learned to watch the city from the vantage of a stone balcony overlooking the throne room's eastern wing. From there, the sprawl of King's Landing presented a tapestry of winding streets, crumbling rooftops, and narrow squares teeming with new industry. A year had passed since the Great Council at Harrenhal had formally acknowledged Daenerys and Jon as co-rulers of Westeros, and although the horrors of war had receded, plenty of challenges remained. She found herself standing against the balustrade in the late afternoon light, recalling times when she'd envisioned sweeping into the city as a conqueror surrounded by an unchallenged legion. It was humbling to realize how different reality had become. She now oversaw a realm inching toward unity not through the hammer of conquest, but through negotiation, compromise, and the memory of what they had faced beyond the wall. The faint clip of boots on stone heralded Jon Targaryen's approach from behind. She turned, smiling when their gazes met. Jon had cut his hair shorter in the warmer season, and though he wore the black leathers reminiscent of the North, he also carried the Targaryen sigil on one shoulder. Approaching quietly, he stood beside her, resting a hand on the old, weathered stone. Beyond the balustrade, the harbor spread out in a glittering arc, ships coming and going, some from the riverlands or the Vale, others from across the narrow sea. He let out a deep breath. "It's easier to stand here than to sit on that throne inside," he remarked softly, casting a glance over his shoulder at the great doors leading to the Iron Throne. The city's bustle rose as a background hum, accompanied by the screech of distant gulls. "I keep thinking about the day I first arrived in King's Landing as a boy. Everything seemed so vast, so impossible. And now, sometimes I still feel that awe. But it's tempered by the knowledge of what it costs to hold power responsibly." Daenerys nodded, resting her elbows on the parapet. "We have a fraction of peace, but no illusions it's permanent. Every day, ravens bring new petitions, new complaints. Some houses bend willingly to our new order, while others bristle at any hint of central authority." Jon's lips curved in a rueful smile. "And we also have lords who remember only that a Targaryen set the throne before Robert's rebellion, as if that alone justifies all. I never realized how complicated leadership could be without a single clear threat like the White Walkers." She reached for his hand. "At least we're past the days of war over this city. My father's ghost doesn't haunt the corridors as viciously now. We owe that, in part, to our allies, and to the lesson of what we faced in the North. It's impossible to yearn for constant war after seeing how close the world came to ending." They lingered in a companionable hush, each lost in reflections of the final confrontation against the Night King. Over a year had passed since that cataclysmic battle, yet the scars remained. Jon's side still twinged in cold weather where an icy blade had found flesh, and Daenerys often had nightmares of Viserion's undead visage. Even so, both recognized that the ghosts of the past had gradually receded into stories. Now the realm asked for new kinds of leadership, patient, discerning, and mindful of petty rivalries that could spark if left unchecked. Footsteps from the corridor behind them signaled the arrival of Tyrion Lannister, who announced himself by clearing his throat. "Your Graces," he said, adjusting the black and red doublet that replaced his old battered attire. He looked somewhat less harried than he had during the war, though his brow retained permanent lines from years of tension. "We have a small council meeting in the Solar. Lord Davos has arrived from Storm's End, bearing rather interesting news about trade convoys in the Narrow Sea." They exchanged glances. Duty never ceased. Daenerys gestured that Tyrion lead on, and both she and Jon followed him through the winding corridors of the Red Keep. Since the exodus of Cersei Lannister and the tenuous arrangement that placed Jaime in a role of nominal caretaker, until Daenerys and Jon returned, some sections of the fortress had been left half-repaired. Yet over the past year, new construction crews from the north and the Reach had mended corridors, replaced shattered stained glass, and cleared the neglected storerooms. In that patchwork environment, the tri-sigil banners, the dragon, the dire wolf, and a unified emblem combining both, hung side by side, symbolic of a monarchy that refused to be purely Targaryen or purely Stark. They reached the solar, a room lit by wide windows facing the city. Inside waited a small cluster of trusted advisors. Ser Davos Seaworth, having traveled from a newly stabilized Storm's End. Missandei, now fully versed in Westerosi dialects and serving as Daenerys' principal counselor in matters of foreign relations. Arthur Dayne, wearing his white cloak in his capacity as Lord Commander of a reformed Kingsguard, quietly standing at the back. A pair of local officials from King's Landing, men who oversaw city watch reforms, lingered off to the side. Grey Worm was absent this day, stationed in the newly expanded city guard training grounds, ensuring discipline. Davos offered a courteous bow to Daenerys and Jon, his weathered features earnest. "Your Graces, I returned from Storm's End last night. It seems the storms around Shipbreaker Bay have eased somewhat, allowing for a new route of trade. I've come with a message from the local merchants. They're eager to see if the Crown will provide incentives to rebuild the old harbor. The area's been neglected for years." Daenerys took a seat at the long wooden table, nodding for Jon to join her. "Incentives? Such as reduced taxes or a royal grant?" "Aye, Your Grace," Davos answered. "They're short on ships and skilled labor. With a bit of coin and a decree from you, they could draw in more commerce. Storm's End sits on prime coastline. Perhaps we can tie it into the lines from the Reach." He paused. "Forgive me if I overstep. I merely carried their request." Jon glanced at Daenerys. "It's not overstepping to bring us the request. Storm's End was battered by the wars, and the surrounding farmland is only starting to recover. We have some surplus in the treasury now, thanks to new trade deals. This might be a worthy investment, especially if it strengthens the entire region." Tyrion nodded thoughtfully. "We can't forget that the Stormlands were often overlooked in the previous system. If we show them genuine support, it may prevent any local lords from turning rebellious out of neglect." Missandei took notes, pen scratching on parchment. "And with calmer waters in Shipbreaker Bay, there's potential for a route that bypasses certain bottlenecks near King's Landing. That could help distribute grain from the Reach more efficiently, especially if the city's population continues to grow." Daenerys folded her hands, scanning the faces in the room. "I'm inclined to approve some measure of support. We must weigh it against other needs. King's Landing still requires more funding to rebuild slums. The Riverlands want grants to repair roads. Dorne expects compensation for the damage inflicted in earlier conflicts. Yet if we keep everything balanced, we can manage." Jon agreed, leaning forward. "Let's earmark a portion of the new trade revenues for Storm's End. The exact figure can be determined once we see the final tallies from the harbor taxes. But I want the local lords to match our investment with labor or resources, so they have some stake in the project." Tyrion tapped the table. "Very well. I'll draft a decree to that effect and present it at the next open court. That should satisfy Storm's End." Davos bowed again, relief evident in his eyes. "Thank you, Your Graces. It's heartening to see how swiftly you address these concerns. You'll have the gratitude of many in the Stormlands." Daenerys allowed a faint smile. "We're all trying to move past the legacy of war. If a strong Storm's End helps achieve that, then let's proceed." The conversation turned to lesser topics. Local disputes near Maidenpool, the continuing assimilation of the Dothraki who chose to settle in Westeros, the Iron Islands' intermittent raiding issues. Each matter received measured attention, reflecting the monarchy's determination to shape a stable realm without brute force. Missandei noted the instructions, and Tyrion prepared a flurry of letters. Arthur Dayne, mostly silent, cast his discerning gaze over the group, ensuring everything was grounded in the principle that had guided them since the White Walkers were defeated. Unity could hold if each region felt heard. When the council session ended, the city officials departed, along with Davos. Tyrion escorted Missandei out, leaving Daenerys, Jon, and Arthur Dayne alone. The sunlight through the windows had softened, turning the room a gentle gold, accentuating the lines of age that had begun to grace Arthur's temples. He bore them with the dignified composure of a man who had witnessed too many wars to romanticize them. Jon noticed the faint scar on Arthur's right forearm, a relic of the final battle. And although the older knight wore the pristine white cloak of the Kingsguard, there was a hint of introspection behind his steady eyes. Daenerys turned to him, sensing that he had lingered for a reason. "Sir Arthur, is something on your mind?" He bowed slightly. "I only wish to inform you that Lord Manderley's convoy arrived at dawn. They bring further news from the north. Also, I've heard rumor that Lady Arya Stark is returning from her travels, though the details remain uncertain. She was in Braavos recently, or so I'm told." Jon's face brightened at the mention of Arya. "She never could stay still for long. If she's coming back, I'll be grateful for her presence. The North remains in good hands under Sansa's administration, but Arya's council always had a unique perspective." Daenerys tilted her head, remembering the fierce intelligence she had glimpsed in Arya's eyes. "I'm curious to hear how her time in Braavos shaped her. Perhaps she'll bring new insights." Arthur paused, as if weighing whether to speak further. "I also have news from some of my old contacts, knights who once served under your father or under the Mad King. They remain scattered across Westeros. A few mention hearing whispers of Cersei Lannister in the Westerlands, near Lannisport. I do not know if it's true. She's a cunning woman, and if she is indeed there, she's maintained a low profile." Jon's expression grew pensive. "We've known for a while that she might still live. Jaime remains uncertain. If she's truly in the Westerlands, does she pose a threat?" Arthur lowered his gaze. "Hard to say. She might attempt to rally disaffected lords or hire mercenaries, but the people are weary of war. Her chances of igniting rebellion seem slim. Still, I thought it best, you know." Daenerys let out a measured breath. "Keep us informed, Sir Arthur. If there's solid evidence of her presence, we might send an envoy to parley. No sense letting resentment fester in secret corners." Arthur saluted, his white cloak trailing behind him as he departed. When the door closed, Daenerys and Jon sat quietly for a moment, absorbing the swirl of concerns. Beyond the Great Council, beyond the battered roads and half-mended alliances, the specter of another war always lurked if old grudges flared. Yet they refused to rule by fear alone. The realm had come too far since the fall of the Night King to squander that fragile stability. In the following days, each dawn brought fresh challenges. Daenerys and Jon found themselves presiding over open courts, hearing petitions from lords, merchants, and small folk who traveled sometimes for weeks just to present a grievance. Disputes ranged from boundary quarrels between minor houses, to merchant guilds requesting standardized coinage, to a group of freed ex-slaves from Essos who sought land and protection in Westeros. Daenerys' heart stirred with sympathy at the plight of these freedfolk, recalling her campaign in Slaver's Bay. She instructed Tyrion to arrange a settlement on Crown lands near the Blackwater where they might farm and live under the Crown's direct protection. Some lords balked at foreigners being granted land, but Daenerys' calm explanation soon reminded them that fresh labor could help rebuild ravaged areas. Amid these administrative duties, Daenerys continued riding regal over the countryside, verifying reports of banditry or lawlessness. More and more, she found only scattered troubles easily resolved by local garrisons. The massive, roving armies of the War of Five Kings were a thing of the past. The unified monarchy maintained a presence in each region, ensuring the kind of stability that had eluded the realm for decades. A new generation of children grew up hearing tales of the White Walkers as a cautionary legend about failing to unite, rather than experiencing war's horror firsthand. Though some cynics insisted conflict would eventually return, the present calm felt like a reprieve. One afternoon, while Jon was meeting with the City Watch captains, Daenerys was notified by a breathless page that Lady Arya Stark had arrived by ship in the city's harbor. Daenerys immediately went to greet her at the docks, curious to see how the young Stark woman might have changed. Upon descending from the Red Keep, Daenerys saw a lean figure in practical traveling leathers, a short sword at her side, stepping off a small Braavosi caravel. A slender Braavosi man with a seamed face followed in her wake, carrying a modest satchel. Arya spotted Daenerys and gave a courteous nod, though formality clearly did not come naturally to her. Her posture exuded self-possession and an aura of quiet confidence. Daenerys smiled. "Lady Arya, welcome back to Westeros and to King's Landing." Arya's expression flickered with a hint of amusement. "I still prefer Winterfell's snow, but it's good to be home, or near enough." "Where's Jon?" "He's in a meeting with the City Watch captains," Daenerys answered. "I can take you to him." "How was your voyage?" Arya shrugged. "Long, stormy near the Stepstones, but I've seen worse." Braavos was instructive, though I suppose you've heard rumors about me being a restless wanderer. Daenerys gestured for Arya to accompany her up the wide main street, lined with vendors and city folk who looked on curiously. "I can relate to being restless. For a long time I traveled Essos in exile, learning to adapt. But you returned at an interesting time. The realm is stable, but each region still has old wounds to mend. Are you planning to remain here, or head north?" Arya glanced around, her sharp eyes assessing each alley. "I'll eventually see Sansa, but for now, I'm curious to see how King's Landing fares under your rule. My father once dreaded the corruption of this place. If it's truly changed, I want to witness that." Daenerys took no offense. She admired Arya's frankness. "Then see for yourself. If you have advice or concerns, don't hold back. We welcome honest counsel." They ascended through the city, passing narrower streets until they reached the Red Keep's gate. Unsullied guards saluted, letting them inside. Within the keep's courtyard, they found Jon concluding his meeting. At the sight of Arya, Jon's face lit with a grin he rarely showed in public. He embraced her, ignoring a few startled looks from nearby guards. Arya grinned back, though her eyes glinted with unshed tears of relief. They parted, exchanging a flood of questions about Sansa's progress in Winterfell, about Braavos, about the Northern Lords. Arya gave quick answers, focusing instead on her reasons for traveling south. "I heard rumors that the freedmen from Essos might face backlash here," she told Jon and Daenerys. "Wanted to see if there was anything I could do. I owe a debt to certain Braavosi who taught me a few things, and I told them I'd check if Essosi immigrants were safe in Westeros." Daenerys nodded. "They are safe for the most part. I'm placing them on crown lands with guaranteed rights. Some local trouble has flared. Prejudice, fear of strangers, but we're stamping that out. If you're inclined to help, perhaps you could speak with them, see if any require special assistance or want training. We do need individuals with unique skills to help integrate newcomers." Jon added, "You'll find plenty of opportunity, but if you prefer a quieter life, Winterfell always has a place for you." Arya laughed lightly. "I'll see where the path leads. Quieter never suited me anyway." Her gaze drifted to the courtyard's training yard. "Might I try sparring with some of the City Watch? See how they handle themselves?" Daenerys exchanged an amused look with Jon. "Go ahead, just be gentle. Some of them might not realize who they're up against." Arya only smirked and strode toward the sparring area, her lithe steps brimming with confidence. Jon and Daenerys watched her go, each recalling how she had grown from the child who once brandished a wooden sword into a worldly traveler who had danced with shadows. If Westeros was forging a new identity, so too were the individuals shaped by the wars. In the weeks that followed, Arya's presence became a minor sensation in the keep. She sparred with the best of the City Watch, besting many with her speed and cunning, though she rarely gloated. She wandered the city's backstreets, sometimes accompanied by a pair of Unsullied for safety, ensuring that any hidden pockets of crime or oppression came to light. Her stories of Braavos piqued interest among lords who had never ventured across the sea. Some saw her as a curiosity, a noble lady with the skill of a water dancer. Others viewed her as living proof that House Stark remained formidable and unpredictable. During this time, a rumor spread that the Iron Bank of Braavos was courting new investments in Westeros, a sign that trust in the monarchy's stability had grown. Tyrion and Missandei met with Braavosi envoys to discuss potential loans for infrastructure projects, mindful that incurring fresh debt could be risky. Jon, upon hearing the proposals, insisted that the crown avoid entangling itself in unmanageable obligations. Daenerys backed him up, recalling how precariously indebted the Seven Kingdoms had been under Robert's rule. The final arrangement was moderate, a carefully restricted line of credit for rebuilding the war-torn crownlands, with tangible collateral in the form of minor trade concessions, but no open-ended arrangement that might lead to exploitation. Meanwhile, letters arrived from the north reporting steady progress. Sansa's leadership had improved crop rotations and winter logistic planning, aided by newly introduced techniques from some of Daenerys' associate advisors. The north still felt the echoes of the war with the White Walkers. Everyone lost someone, and the fear of an unknown monstrous threat lingered in many hearts, but tangible signs of revival gave cause for cautious optimism. Arya's presence in King's Landing prompted speculation that the Starks were further entwining themselves with Daenerys' Targaryen monarchy, a rumor that both Jon and Daenerys neither confirmed nor denied. The time for forced alliances had passed. They preferred a balanced arrangement shaped by necessity and choice. Meanwhile, the realm remained mostly calm. Trade continued, local lords busied themselves with reconstruction, and the memory of the White Walkers faded into half-believed legend for those who hadn't witnessed the final battle. Daenerys noticed that Rhaegal grew restless at times, circling the skies above King's Landing, perhaps sensing her own agitation. She tried to console herself with the notion that even if Cersei still harbored malice, the realm's unity was too solid for a single fugitive to break. Yet recollections of how cunning Cersei could be lingered like a faint headache. Finally, after a month and a half, an exhausted messenger stumbled into King's Landing with a sealed letter from Jaime. It read in terse lines, "I have encountered a band of Sellswords claiming loyalty to the former queen. Cersei was indeed with them, though her mental state is erratic. I managed to parley, but she fled. I believe she sees no future under your rule and would rather vanish than yield. She might cross the sea or find some remote hideout. I doubt she has the resources to start a rebellion. I will return once I've scoured the last rumored hideouts." Tyrion read it aloud to Jon and Daenerys, relief and sadness mingling in his tone. Daenerys closed her eyes in thought. So she refuses to face the realm. She poses no immediate threat, only a faint possibility of future mischief. Jon exhaled slowly. Then perhaps that's the end of it. We're near enough. We can't chase every rumor. Let her vanish. If she reappears to cause trouble, we'll handle it then. Tyrion swallowed. Agreed. We have a realm to govern. She made her choice. And so the matter of Cersei Lannister receded into an unsettled footnote, a last echo of the old regime that refused closure. Gradually, even that tension ebbed. The Crown's administration pressed on, ushering in expansions of farmland and new trade pacts. Word arrived from Dorne that a young scion of House Martell had been recognized to lead the region under loose Targaryen oversight, reinforcing the partial independence arrangement from the Great Council. The Vale consolidated its defenses and maintained open roads to the capital. The Iron Islands, under a more moderate chieftain after Euron's defeat, turned inward, focusing on fishing and salvage operations. Westeros found itself in a precarious but genuine era of peace and reconstruction. That summer, Daenerys and Jon traveled north again, visiting Winterfell for the first time in nearly a year. The journey took them through fields of ripening grain in the Riverlands, a testament to how swiftly the land could recover when not ravaged by war. At Winterfell, a joyous welcome awaited. Sansa greeted them in the great courtyard, her hair braided in the northern style, wearing a thick embroidered gown signifying her authority. She and Daenerys exchanged a warmer embrace than their initial, wary greetings so long ago. Sansa then led them into the great hall, where a feast had been arranged. The smell of roasted boar, fresh bread, and spiced wine filled the hall, a stark contrast to the lean times during the war. Bran Stark, seated in a wheeled chair near the head of the table, offered a cryptic smile at seeing them. Though he had grown withdrawn in many respects, his presence carried a calm weight. Many said he saw all truths in dreams, though no one pressed him for details. Arya, who had arrived earlier, recounted her time in King's Landing, praising some of the City Watch improvements. Lords from across the north toasted Daenerys' name with cautious respect. Old doubts about a Targaryen queen had softened, replaced by gratitude that the monarchy had restored order without ignoring northern autonomy. Despite the warm atmosphere, Jon and Daenerys recognized that bridging the cultural divide took ongoing effort. That evening, after the feast ended, Daenerys and Jon slipped outside to the courtyard, guided by the memory of fresh northern air. Snow had vanished except on the highest peaks, leaving a crisp chill under the starry sky. They paused at the spot where years prior, so many had gathered to greet traveling lords, to plan for wars, to bury the old dead. The ghosts of Ned Stark and the younger Starks seemed to hover in the quiet, a reminder of how drastically life had changed. Jon turned to Daenerys, a contemplative look on his face. If someone told me when I was a boy, bastard of Ned Stark as I believed, that I'd stand here as a king with a queen at my side, forging peace among the 7 kingdoms, I would have laughed. It's all so improbable. Daenerys reached for his hand, the warmth of his fingers offsetting the chill. I know the feeling. I was a frightened girl sold to a call, dreaming of a throne I'd never seen. All I ever had was a name, and now we're shaping a realm that's ours to guide. Neither purely Targaryen nor purely Stark, but something in between. He inclined his head. It's the union Rhaegar likely dreamed of. Ice and fire. A realm saved from the darkness. We owe so many. Arthur, Dayne, Tyrion, the lords who put aside hatred to unite. But we also owe ourselves. We didn't succumb to bitterness. Daenerys stood on tiptoe to kiss him lightly, an expression of mutual gratitude and affection that transcended the burdens of rule. Overhead, the northern constellations twinkled, as if echoing the silent vow that they would continue to shepherd this realm toward prosperity rather than repeat the cycle of devastation. For so long, the Targaryen name had been linked to fire and madness. Now it carried connotations of deliverance. The following morning, they met with Sansa in the solar overlooking the Winterfell courtyard, planning improvements for the North's roads and discussing possible marriages among northern houses to strengthen alliances with the crown. Though some northerners resisted the notion of tying themselves too closely to the south, Sansa recognized that friendly ties might bring trade benefits and avoid future unrest. Daenerys, respecting northern pride, insisted that any alliances be voluntary, not coerced. That approach won further goodwill. During a brief excursion, Daenerys visited the crypts beneath Winterfell, curious about the final resting place of Ned Stark and others. She found the statues austere, each face carved with solemn dignity. Jon guided her along the shadowed halls, naming ancestors and recounting how the North's identity had always revolved around unwavering resolve. Kneeling at the statue of Lyanna Stark, Daenerys felt a pang of sorrow for the mother Jon barely knew, the woman whose union with Rhaegar had led to so much tragedy, and eventually to the child who would help save the realm. In that quiet place, Daenerys whispered words of thanks, as though Lyanna might hear across the veil. Jon stood beside her, silent but moved, reaffirming the intangible bond that had sparked the entire chain of events. When the time came to depart, Sansa and Arya accompanied them to the gates, along with a small retinue of northern soldiers. Arya teased Jon about returning soon if he didn't want her to run the city watch in his absence, while Sansa offered Daenerys a respectful nod, acknowledging a shared devotion to the realm's welfare. They parted with genuine warmth, each recognizing that unity did not require uniformity. The Targaryen monarchy was flexible enough to let regions preserve their character, so long as they upheld stability. The journey south was quieter, marked by a sense that the final pieces of the new era were falling into place. The roads teemed with travelers, merchants, pilgrims, even a few bards who sang ballads of the war against the dead. One such ballad extolled the White Wolf and the Dragon Queen, recounting how they allied to vanquish the Night King. Daenerys, overhearing it sung in a roadside inn, blushed at the romanticized verses. Jon simply shook his head and paid for the bard's supper, a mixture of amusement and embarrassment. Yet in that bit of verse lay a kernel of truth. The realm's memory had already shifted from horror to legend, weaving the events into a tapestry that might inspire future generations. Upon returning to King's Landing, they found that Jaime had reappeared, exhausted and empty-handed. He reported no further sign of Cersei. He surmised she had slipped away, perhaps renting a ship from Lannisport or retreating into remote mountainous terrain. With no fresh developments, life in the capital resumed. Over months, Daenerys and Jon commissioned new architecture. A house of healing to train medics, expansions to the city's sewage system, and a special quarter for foreign artisans to integrate with local guilds. The freedmen from Essos cultivated farmland beyond the Blackwater, forging a multicultural hamlet that, despite occasional frictions, endured with the crown's protection. Regal soared overhead often, though Drogon preferred the wide plains near the Rose Road, only visiting the city occasionally. Seasons passed, and with them came minor disputes among houses, treaties with distant free cities, and the births of a new generation who never knew the old traumas. Daenerys occasionally penned letters to the remaining Targaryen loyalists across Essos, not out of ambition, but to ease old tensions. Jon oversaw the introduction of new winter contingency plans, ensuring the realm would never be caught unprepared should another vicious cold descend. Their marriage, once overshadowed by the urgent threat of the dead, deepened into a genuine partnership that served both the realm and their personal bond. Arthur Dayne continued to stand watch, his white cloak a symbol of unwavering guardianship, training new knights in a code that combined the old Kingsguard ideals with the monarchy's reformed ethos. Eventually, news filtered in that Cersei Lannister had died in some lonely coastal village, undone by an outbreak or possibly an altercation with smugglers. Confirmation was elusive, but reports came from disparate sources, lending enough credibility that even Jaime accepted it with quiet resignation. The last of the old faction vanished, and though a residue of sadness lingered, Tyrion found closure, devoting himself fully to the monarchy's cause. With no single enemy left to battle, the monarchy's greatest foe became complacency or internal squabbles. Daenerys and Jon addressed these threats through constant vigilance, never allowing arrogance to corrode their sense of responsibility. They traveled often, one season to the Westerlands to ensure fair treatment for the houses once beholden to the Lannisters, another season to Dorne to confirm the autonomy arrangement. At each stop, they listened as much as they decreed, reminding people that the monarchy could be accessible and just. Years converged into a tapestry of consistent progress. Ports opened in places long neglected. The City Watch integrated men from different regions. The North refined its agricultural resilience. The Vale boasted secure trade routes. Dorne embraced cultural pride under a recognized leader. The Iron Islands sent delegates to the capital, forging a maritime agreement that prized exploration over reaving. A generation that only heard rumors of the terrifying White Walkers came of age, forging bonds that seemed unbreakable. Though pockets of dissent inevitably emerged, these never gathered enough momentum to challenge the crown's carefully nurtured goodwill. In time, Daenerys felt the stirrings of new life within her. The day she confirmed she carried Jon's child, a hush of awe and excitement rippled through the Red Keep. Memories of the Targaryen line's precarious survival contrasted sharply with this promise of continuity. Tyrion openly admitted a sense of relief, stating that a stable succession could quell countless intrigues. Jon and Daenerys shared a mixture of joy and solemnity, aware that their child symbolized not just their personal union, but the realm's future. A living link between House Targaryen and House Stark, forged in the fires of war but grown in an era of peace. Arthur Dayne, upon hearing the news, bowed deeply, tears glinting in his eyes at the thought that Rhaegar's lineage would not simply endure but flourish. When the child was born, amid the hush of King's Landing's midwives, no dragons roared in the sky, no epic storms battered the keep, yet the entire city seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Jon emerged from the birthing chamber, eyes wet, announcing the birth of a daughter. Daenerys, pale from the ordeal but triumphant, named her Lyanna Rhaella Targaryen Stark, a carefully chosen tribute to both lines. In that moment, the realm's lingering ghosts felt one step closer to rest. Bells rang across the city at dawn, and even in the far-flung corners of Westeros, word spread that a child of ice and fire had entered the world, not amid the terrors of war, but in the embrace of hope. During the naming ceremony in the Great September, rebuilt in a modest form after the destruction wrought by Cersei's wildfire, a hush fell as Daenerys and Jon knelt before the altar, presenting their daughter to the realm. Arya stood close, arms folded, a protective glint in her eyes, while Sansa had journeyed south to witness the moment. Lords from each region looked on, some with tears, some with fervent prayers. At the periphery, Arthur Dayne stood like a sentinel, hand resting on the pommel of dawn. A subtle wind rustled the newly hung banners, and the infant yawned, oblivious to the weight of destiny. The crown's principal herald announced her name, and the congregation echoed it, as though sealing a vow that she would grow in a land free from the horrors that once threatened to consume it. No single event can promise lasting harmony. Yet in that quiet vow made by a realm that remembered tragedy, the seeds of a future blossomed. Over the ensuing years, Daenerys and Jon continued their diligent stewardship. They introduced reforms in the administration of justice, ensuring that local disputes did not escalate into feuds. They welcomed envoys from distant lands, forging alliances that discouraged any opportunistic aggression. The freedmen's settlement expanded, eventually recognized as a free borough under the crown's protection. Rhaegal, aging gracefully, spent more time resting on the keep's towers or hunting in the crownlands. His once fiery roars quieter but no less regal. So it was that the realm carried forward the legacy of ice and fire, shaped by the knowledge of how close annihilation had once loomed. Children grew up hearing lullabies that told of a dark winter, and how a queen and king united men, women, and dragons to cast back that darkness. Though the lyrics idealized events, the core truth remained. Unity had saved the realm from the White Walkers, and unity had continued to preserve the peace. Whether forging roads, establishing trade pacts, or ensuring justice for the lowliest farmer, the crown acted with caution and empathy. The name Targaryen was no longer whispered in fear alone. It bore new meaning that carried the memory of countless sacrifices. Arthur Dayne lived to see the realm transform, his hair silvering as he served faithfully in the Kingsguard. In his private reflections, he often pictured Rhaegar Targaryen, smiling at the knowledge that Rhaegar's child had not only survived, but guided the kingdom into an unprecedented era of stability. No matter what the future held, Arthur felt he had upheld every oath that once weighed so heavily on him. Whenever the bells chimed in King's Landing, or the crier announced some new legislation bridging the old divides, he heard an echo of the vow he made at the Tower of Joy, fulfilled in spirit and deed. In the fullness of time, as each region regained confidence and prosperity, emissaries from the free cities began to treat with Westeros as an equal partner, not a fractured backwater. Bravos, Pentos, and even Volantis sent delegates to marvel at how quickly Westeros had recovered. The unsaid subtext was that they recognized the monarchy's legitimacy. No longer could unscrupulous slavers or sellsword companies prey on Westerosi turmoil without facing swift reprisal. Daenerys, recalling her earlier crusade against slavery in Essos, maintained a firm stance that any realm wishing to deal with Westeros must acknowledge the crown's ban on the slave trade. Over time, these principles seeded a subtle shift in how Essos viewed forced servitude. Progress was slow, but cracks appeared in long-entrenched institutions. Once, Daenerys had dreamed of crossing the narrow sea to claim a throne by fire and blood. She had done so by forging alliances and saving a realm. Now, ironically, she influenced Essos not as a warlord, but as a stable queen who championed the same values she once fought for among the slavers in Meereen. And so the story continued year by year, a careful tapestry of progress. There were setbacks, occasional rebellions by discontented lords, localized famines when harvests failed, fresh rivalries among younger heirs. But each challenge faced a monarchy unafraid to lean on counsel, to extend mercy, or to employ measured force only if no other path sufficed. The memory of the Great Council at Harrenhal lingered like a guiding star, reminding the realm that major decisions must not be the whim of a single ruler. Jon and Daenerys balanced each other well. His stoic northern caution and her passionate Targaryen drive created an equilibrium that neither alone could have maintained so deftly. In the final measure, Westeros achieved something it had rarely known: a stable monarchy that avoided the pitfalls of absolute tyranny, a realm that had confronted oblivion and chosen unity. The next generation grew up intermingled, northerners and southerners, former foes now exchanging goods and wedding vows. Though the realm did not forget the tragedies of old, they harnessed them as lessons, forging laws that prohibited the old forms of cruelty that once festered under weak kings. Local councils in each major region participated in a broader assembly, ensuring grievances could be heard before they escalated to war. The crown's authority was grounded in a moral contract. The monarchy safeguarded the people, and the people offered loyalty and tribute. From the moment Jon Targaryen had been crowned in secret by Arthur Dayne at the Tower of Joy, to the day Daenerys soared on dragons to rescue the living from the Night King, the entire journey had been improbable. Yet that improbable alliance shaped a new dawn. The Song of Ice and Fire, which once prophesied endless conflict, manifested in the union that halted the undead and overcame centuries of feudal strife. Within the labyrinthine corridors of the Red Keep, the air no longer reeked of fear and betrayal, but carried the hum of purposeful governance. Far to the north, Winterfell's gates opened to merchants from across the continent. Dorne's parched deserts saw caravans carrying northern pelts. The Vale's high passes guided trade caravans laden with goods from Essos. And at the center, a monarchy that remembered it served the realm, not the other way around. Arthur Dayne, in his twilight years, sometimes walked the Red Keep's walls at sunrise, recalling how the first light once reminded him of the Tower of Joy. Now, it reminded him that each morning brought the possibility of renewal. One crisp morning, he stood at a parapet, the city just starting to stir below. In the east, pale gold light bled into a pale blue sky. Dawn, the blade, rested in its scabbard, seldom drawn now except for ceremonial functions, yet he felt its presence keenly. He could almost sense Rhaegar's voice in the hush. Protect them, Ser Arthur. And so he had. At last, the story settled into a steady rhythm, neither a triumphant flourish nor a tragic coda, but a quiet, enduring harmony. Perhaps future threats would arise. Perhaps new conflicts would test the realm. But in that era, with Daenerys and Jon guiding the hearts of lords and small folk alike, Westeros found a balance it had never before known. Farmers tilled fields unafraid of marauding armies. Craftsmen plied their trades in bustling towns. Children sang songs of dragons not as harbingers of doom, but as majestic protectors who cast out the horrors of the night. And in the Red Keep's courtyard, a small girl named Lyanna Riella Targaryen Stark toddled toward her parents, living proof that the lines of ice and fire could intertwine to create something both gentle and strong. The Watchers smiled, seeing in her bright eyes a reflection of all that had come before, and all that might yet be. A realm shaped by unity, memory, and the unbreakable vow that the dawn would always come.